It's been my honor and privilege to be able to interview many of our World War II veterans here at the Glen Ridge. As we celebrate the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II, we wanted to get a perspective of what they did and how they served and where they were during the war. You'll see in the following video that they have quite a unique experience. Many served in the South Pacific, some in Europe, and many served in areas where there were hostile operations, and then others may have served back in the United States. Their service, regardless of where they were, was an important part to the success of our nation during the war. I appreciate them coming in, and I appreciate all their service and sacrifice during this time. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, Reverend.
Now, I understand you were in the Marines during World War II.
That's correct. First of all, I never thought in a million years I'd ever be in the military. I was already accepted at Harvard Business School as a senior at the university, and on December 7th, I was ice skating on my campus and went back to the university, and everybody was stone quiet, listening to the radio. And somebody said, the Japanese have just attacked Pearl Harbor. And there I was, 21 years old, and I knew exactly I'd be in some service.
And so how did you end up with the Marines?
Well, I was going with a gal on the campus of the University of Cincinnati, and we had a Marine lieutenant come on campus to do some recruiting, and she thought he was so handsome and so beautiful in his blue uniform, and she said, "Ralph, you have to become a Marine." I did, and I got a what do you call the
a Dear John letter.
John letter while I was on Guadalcanal.
Oh. Can you tell us a little bit about what you did as far as, were you an infantryman or?
Yes, I was, and a ground pounder, as we called it in the Marine Corps. And spent 4 years, almost through the whole war, in the Marine Corps, and then 7 years in the organized reserve after that.
Now, I understand that you were involved in several invasions of different islands in the Pacific.
Well, Guadalcanal, Bougainville in the Northern Solomons, and Guam. I was what they called a scout, which became towards the end of the war, were called reconnaissance units. And so I led a platoon back, and after 2.5 years in the Pacific, I was brought back for a little home leave recreation, so-called. I was just getting ready to go back out again when all orders were held in abeyance, and I didn't, of course, have to go out. Wow. But the Marine Corps has been special my entire life.
Well, and I understand you just celebrated another milestone in your life.
Yes, I'm in my second century now.
Second century. Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Ralph Franklin, thank you for your service and all that you've done for our country. God bless you.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you.
Well, Don, I appreciate you coming in today. I understand that you were stationed in the Navy in the Pacific during the war.
Yes, I was in the Oakland Navy Supply Depot right at the very end of the war, and I had orders to go to Pearl Harbor. And there is my sea story, because one day out of San Francisco, I was in a small carrier, and we hit a horrible, horrible storm. And I can still hear the captain say, "Gentlemen, we are lucky to be alive. This carrier took almost a 45-degree roll, and the gun mounts below the flight deck were awash."
Whoa.
That's my sea story, true story.
So you went to Tokyo after the war?
Yeah, right after the war. Navy was very small and the Army was big. So it was my responsibility to go to the Army and get supplies to take up to the small ship stores that the Navy had in Tokyo. And I remember at one time I had a lot of money. I had pearls and things like that, and I had one MP truck in front of me, one MP truck behind me, escorted me to Tokyo to be sure I didn't get robbed. I was a supply officer on board a hotel barge. It was called a APL 46. It was 2 stories. It was not self-propelled, and it was just moored in the Sumida River near downtown Tokyo, and that was my job as supply officer. So I had a ship store, a laundry, dry cleaning, everything else, and I was the supply officer on board this barge. And it was a fascinating short-term job until I got out of the Navy and worked in Japan and MacArthur's headquarters as a civilian for almost a year before I came home to finish my college. It was fascinating because when I was as a civilian working in MacArthur's headquarters, I got to inspect properties that were owned by Allied people. In other words, whether it be a missionary's home, a former factory owned by Otis Elevator. In other words, through the Japanese Ministry of Finance, they would take me to these various properties, and so I could write and tell people back in the States, you know, what I had seen and what was like prior to their eventual restitution.
Now, I understand, were you there in Tokyo Bay when MacArthur took the surrender?
No, I was actually in Bayonne, New Jersey, in a Navy supply depot.
Oh, okay. So,
and fortunately, I was able to get into Times Square.
oh,
And so I experienced part of that jazz in Times Square at the end of the war.
so you were
But I wasn't one of the ones that kissed the girls, you know, had the picture taken.
Well, thank you so much again for your service and for coming to share your experience with us.
You're very welcome.
Good afternoon, Punky. Thank you for joining us today.
Well, I'm happy to be with you.
Now, I understand you served in the Navy and were with the Seabees. Could you tell us a little bit about
That's
that?
correct. I was going to Yale University, and on my way from New Haven into New York, I passed by a Navy Reserve training ship, and I figured I would enlist for the 90-day wonder course that they had. So I went in and went through the 90 days, and when they commissioned us, they put crossed leaves on my sleeve instead of a star. And I asked them why, and it's because I was a civil engineer. And when they finally figured out they better get a little bit more out of me, they sent me into the Pacific. And I was on the island of Iwo Jima. On Iwo Jima, we did not have any piers or docks. We had to go off the beach and up over the cargo nets into the ship, and away we went. So, we built a couple of airstrips. I built a road up to where they planted the flag.
Wow, that's fantastic.
When they took it, and
now, where were you when the war actually ended, when you got word that the Japanese were going to surrender?
Japan. I spent 6 months in occupation in Japan, and saw the surrender in Tokyo Bay with the Japanese admirals. I was on a ship that was watching.
Oh, in Tokyo Bay. Well, again, thank you so much for sharing that experience with us.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, George.
Good afternoon, Chaplain Jim.
Cool. Well, please tell us a little bit about your service.
Well, I was drafted out of high school, went through basic training in Camp Croft, South Carolina, shipped over on a troop ship to Africa. I was in North Africa, but I didn't do much in North Africa. Got on another troop ship, went to Italy, and I joined my 88th Infantry Division someplace, I'm not sure where it was, below Rome. And fought our way into Rome, went through Rome, which was an open city. We didn't fight in Rome, but we had a date with some Germans on the other side of the city. And so we fought our way up there a little bit, and then we went into a rest area. I was in 3 major campaigns. I can't read them from here, but I have 3 battle stars on my World War II medal, indicate the service that I did do. We fought our way up. I ended up across the Arno River up in Florence, fought our way across that. That was another bad one. And the war ended.
Well, you were an infantryman. You earned the Combat Infantry Badge as well as the Bronze Star for your service in those campaigns.
Right, that's correct. I was in a water-cooled machine gun and a 81 millimeter mortar platoon. I had mostly to do with the 81 millimeter mortars.
But you also had a chance to write a couple of articles while you were in the service.
Yes, I did. When we went back into rest areas, I made contact with the division's public relations people who were professional newsmen. You have one story I gave to you about a religious going to Mass in Italy with the snow falling. I'll never forget it. And the other one was what it was like as a combat veteran going up in a big truck to the front lines, wondering if it was going to be your last time or what was happening. It was a psychological moment that all the guys in the truck had to overcome. I eventually got sent home, and I was supposed to have, 3 or 4 weeks off, and then report back. And then my division, I think it was my division, but I was assigned to some combat, because of my experience in combat, some combat infantry division were going to land, be the first landing people in Japan. And Harry Truman has always been one of my favorite presidents because he dropped that bomb, and if he hadn't dropped it, I wouldn't be talking to you today.
Well, again, George, thank you so much for coming by and sharing this with us.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you very much.
Well, good afternoon, Mr. McKee. It's so great to be able to sit down with you this afternoon. Where were you assigned during the war?
Well, most of the time I was in training because I started my training phase. I went through the Eastern Flying Training Command. I was put into primary flight training, and those would be interesting planes to see today because they were old biplanes made by Boeing at the time, and they were canvas covered. When we went out of primary, we were sent to basic. That was usually it. And most of the time you were flying old, what they call Vultee B-13s, BT-13s. And I was picked one of a group of 100 young men that were sent to West Point, New York. From there, I was sent back down to Georgia, to Moody Field in Valdosta, Georgia, and flew at that time what was a B-25. And that was a great experience because actually that was a combat aircraft.
Mm-hmm.
So we had an opportunity to fly that. And from there I got my wings.
Okay.
And it wasn't shortly after that the war in Europe ended either.
But what was the feeling of yourself and those who were preparing for combat now not having to go?
Relief.
Yeah.
Big time. As recent statistics have shown, the mortality rate in the Air Force was even higher than the Marine Corps, I think.
It was great to know that we had people who were ready, willing, and able to serve if we needed you, and we appreciate your service. Thank you so much.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Jim.
We were Signal Corps, and we were the basic communication unit from China to the United States, finding a way of communicating with the States. It sounds like it's an easy thing, but it wasn't. We had these giant communications devices where the poor guy had to climb all the way up and maybe come back down. Everything seemed to work out, and I seemed to get involved in the fixing things. We had a lot of problems, naturally, and in China, you just didn't pick up the phone and call the
spare parts department.
That's right. That's right.
But I understand you were in China when you got the word that Japan was surrendering?
But it took a few months before I got discharged. So they had to get me across the ocean, back home, and it was no complicated problem, just time.
Mm-hmm.
And it worked out very well.
All right. And your branch of service was with the Army?
It was the Army. It was the Army Signal Corps as a part of the Army.
Very good. Well, again, we appreciate your service. Thank you for your part in what you did during the war. We really appreciate it. Good afternoon. We're here with Bob Henderson, and we were asking Bob what it was like to hear that the war had ended 75 years ago.
Well, at that time I was in Hawaii. I had just been taken off the ship that I had been on, the USS Henrico, APA 45, and I was at the IEA Replacement Center waiting to be reassigned to a ship. I very frankly do not remember celebrating the end of World War II. This may sound surprising, but I never drank alcohol or beer or anything, so most of the guys that were celebrating, I suppose, were drinking it up. The ship that I had just been come off then went on for the invasion, not of Iwo Jima, but of Okinawa. And took a kamikaze plane in the bridge of the ship. The captain and 5 officers and 40 enlisted men were killed, and that happened to be my battle station on the Henrico. And I was fortunate to have been taken off it before that happened.
And what were your duties on the ship?
I was an electrician's mate, and on the Henrico, it was primarily repairing electrical equipment. My specialty was a potato peeler in the kitchen. Whenever that went out, they called for Henderson. I never knew what I did to correct it. I took it apart and put it back together again and hit the button, and it worked.
What?
At the end of the war, they were still doing atomic testing, and I was a 3rd-class electrician mate. I was offered 2nd class. I had already passed all the requirements. If I signed up to go out to the Bikini Atoll for the next explosion of an atomic bomb. And I had a choice between that and going home, and I chose to go home. The highlight of it for me was that my brother in the 5th Marine Division, who was preparing for the invasion, never took place.
Well, again, Bob, thank you so much for your service.
Okay.
And we appreciate you and all you've done. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
I'm here with Bob Enander, and he's going to share with us some of his experiences as a World War II veteran.
I ran out of GI Bill and heard about the Air Force expanding, so I thought, well, I'll just go ahead and join the Air Force, knowing that I wouldn't make the cut but receive a little additional GI Bill, finish my education, get my degree in engineering, and go on from there. And as it turned out, I did make the cut, and I love flying so much. I stayed in the Air Force for 5 years and then went on to an airline career.
That you entered the Marine Corps at age 15, is that
That's
correct?
Yes.
And that you got to Okinawa just in time to prepare for the Japanese invasion.
That's right. A month after the island was secure, we arrived along with about 150,000 other Marine and Army troops to begin amphibious assault training. And shortly after the arrival, August 6th to be exact, we heard about the super bomb. Nuclear bomb and atomic bomb was not in our vocabulary at the time. We just heard about a super bomb, one bomber, one bomb, and a city was destroyed. And just like that, the war was over. Being an ignorant teenager, I was a little disappointed not having had any combat experience. But I soon realized that what a wonderful thing it was because of the predicted 1 million casualties.
All right. Well, thank you for sharing your story with us, and we really appreciate your service. Thank you, Bob. Dr. Cohen,
Yes.
thank you so much for coming down today. And I understand that you were a pharmacist mate in the Navy.
That's correct. I was sent to this hospital, and they asked me to go down to the laboratory, and the commander of the laboratory threw his arms around me and said, if this war's going to go on for 10 more years, you're never leaving my side. He was in a position where he had 48 waves and he was the only male. I became the second male and did all the work that he had to do, which he didn't want to do.
A number of the sailors came back from the Pacific, were not feeling very well or had some issues.
Oh, they were very, very sick. There were a lot of tropical diseases in the South Pacific that these men caught, and they were difficult to treat and also diagnose. I learned a lot, to be honest with you. It was educational, and you had the feeling that you were accomplishing something worthwhile.
What was that experience when the word got out that the war was finally over?
It was very, very joyous, actually.
A lot of celebrations?
Oh, everybody was extremely happy, but why not? It's part of that whole thing, I think, of that book called The Greatest Generation.
Mm-hmm.
I think everybody was motivated. Everybody wanted to go into the service. I think if you were made 4F, that was a disgrace.
Well, thank you for coming in today, and thank you again for your service.
Thank you very much. Pleasure.
Mr. Greene, welcome. I want to thank you for your service. Please share with us what you did in the Navy.
Well, I started off, I was a freshman in college, and I was in the Navy V6 Reserve program. And I was assigned to, at that time, what they call a patrol craft. It was an anti-submarine warfare vessel for depth charges and everything against submarines. When I was down there, on occasion, Admiral Halsey came through there on a destroyer also because his carrier could not come through the canal. It had to go around South America, so he came through there, and he asked the commandant if there was any good ship handlers in his district in Panama. He needed a couple to handle destroyers. And the commandant gave him my name as the best one in Panama to know how to handle ships, because I went through the Panama Canal maybe 30 times, back and forth. I used to go in the canal without being even tied up to the side of the canal. I just maneuvered my ship just so I'd go up and down with the whole thing.
And then Admiral Halsey called me aboard his destroyer and wanted to know if I would like to go to the Pacific. I said, I have no choice. You tell me what to do, and I have to do it. And he laughed like that. A few weeks later, they called me from in Panama, and they said, do this, do that, and I flew out to Pearl Harbor, at which point they gave me a destroyer to take out and handle to see how I liked it. Then I went back to Panama, and then they called me up later. They assigned me to a destroyer for 2 invasions, Okinawa and Iwo Jima.
Wow.
And they gave me a ship, and I was a picket one, they called me. A picket one was the one that would go in the dock with the CB to clean up the beach, smooth it out, so when the Army invaded, or the Marines, the beach was a little more acceptable to people climbing all over the place, maneuvering in the tanks and whatever they had.
So you were able to start out your career as a Navy ensign. You became a midshipman and then promoted to ensign, and then actually got a field promotion from ensign to lieutenant in order to command a destroyer.
I'll tell you some interesting things that happened. How it's a small world. I was at the airport here in Sarasota, and a little gray-haired lady came up to me and said, "Are you Mr. Greene?" She said, I kissed you in 1945.
Oh.
As you did? When was this? She was in Staten Island. And my husband was a part of your crew that was getting off the ship. Now, I'll never forget, you were the last one off the ship. You folded the flag, put it under your arm, and walked down the gangway, and all the women kissed you. Thank you for bringing their husbands or sons or relatives of theirs back safely from the Pacific. So that was interesting.
Well, that's wonderful. That's a great story.
Yeah.
Thank you again for sharing that with us.
All right. My
Take care.
pleasure.
I hope that you've enjoyed our time today and looking at these different interviews from our service members here at the Glen Ridge. Again, we're so thankful for their service and all that they've contributed to the success of our nation and to the success of our lives here in the Glen Ridge. I want to say a special thanks to them and all our participants. Thank you so much. Take care.